Hello, this is Joanne Forrester, also known as the Empress of Biz, and Sal Acosta, who I call the Duke of Business and my good colleague and friend. And sometimes we are on the opposite ends of the discussion. We're talking today about on Let's Talk Business to a consultant who I think Sal should introduce. He's been talking a lot to her. Sal, your guest, our guest.
Well, thank you, Joanne. So today we have with us Tobey Wyatt. She is the founder and an executive coach with Motherlode Advising in Chicago. Although I know because I've talked to her before that she does work all over the U.S. and a lot of us had shifted to that because of the magic of video chat. But Toby, welcome to our show. Let's start with why don't you just tell us a little bit maybe about your background, how you decided to be the founder of Motherlode, what motivated you, what skills you bring to the table, and just give us your general introduction.
Thanks. Yeah. So I come to all of this from a deep operational background. I've done head of operations type work, I've done chief of staff type work. And really, what happened is I experienced two layoffs in 2 years. And that really shook my understanding. Up until that point, I had always sort of expected to be the right hand, the number two, right? I'm great at that support position, but I never considered myself an entrepreneur. And so the two layoffs made me realize, however, that as the main earner for the family, employment wasn't as stable of a income as I had anticipated it to be. So my second layoff afforded me a pretty strong runway to figure out what I was going to do for the coming period. So I started Motherlode Advising. It was different at the time. I really was thinking about bringing my operational execution support to small businesses. And the real challenge was that a lot of small business leaders, startups, they really misinterpreted what I was doing as being yet another VA firm. And that's not what I do. But it would take a lot of education to get them to understand the value proposition difference between what I'm bringing to the table and what a VA should be bringing to the table. And so it's evolved over the last few years and realizing that not only was that a difficult educational challenge, but I was actually building my business on all of my weakest qualities. And I think this is something that more people do than admit it. Um, and it's the fact that I know that the weakest link for operations is execution. But when I'm in a job, whether that's been an employment role, whether that's been one of my consulting gigs, whether that's been my executive coaching, people lean into revealing things to me, um, making me their confidant, bringing me into really intimate conversations. And I realized I've been an executive coach for the whole time. I was a peer advisor when I was in elementary and middle school. So I've been doing this kind of work for a really long time. And I really just had to own that and live into it more recently.
So, Toby, let me ask you a question because obviously I've talked to you before. I've seen your profile on LinkedIn, and um, you have a somewhat similar background to me in the sense that you have some really big company experience, like for example with Boeing, of course, a huge, very structured company, let me say it. And then at the
Yep.
same time, now you're having all these experiences with small businesses, and including yourself as a small business, helping other small business.
Hmm.
Um, what has been the most surprising thing when you first came from this sort of big company background and you start talking to these small business owners that are maybe very entrepreneurial? What was the most surprising thing? What was the thing that you least expected?
Yeah. I think I have the benefit of having bounced between the two for my entire career. So there wasn't a whole lot surprising to me, except for the fact that I really wanted to dig back into that small business and startup market. Only because I started my first career job, I guess you would say, was still while I was in high school, and I ended up being a personal assistant to an entrepreneur. And so that was an entrepreneurial experience. And then later I worked for Northwestern Mutual, which is a corporate experience. And then I've just sort of done that bounce back and forth. So none of it's really surprising to me because I've just had so much exposure over my life. But what I definitely appreciate, and I will say it just makes me want to stay in that small business and startup space, is um the ability to actually affect change. I think in the corporate jobs that I've had, it was very frustrating that I am a person who's constantly scanning the environment for problems, and I would see them and I might even have a suggestion for how to solve them, and I might even have the bandwidth to implement a solution that I have a recommendation for. But there's a rigidity with corporations of, oh, that's somebody else's job, that's somebody else's department, that's somebody else, no, we can't do that right now. And then I would, it's fine. I don't believe I have all of the right solutions. I don't believe I, am the right answer to everything. However, it's frustrating to watch people continue to struggle um, when I have a potential solution that I'm willing to try, especially under my own effort. And the interesting sort of twist on that with small businesses is that I find a lot of them struggle without change. They it is easier to affect change in small business, but they get so grounded in either this is what got me my start, this is what worked, this is what led me to my first 5 clients, and they resist change nonetheless. But I do know that if I can get in there and work some magic, then change can be found.
I would like to ask a couple questions. I did a lot. I targeted the market that you were working in. I was in corporate, and they didn't like me, and I didn't like them, even though I made a lot of money off them. Because the very thing that you said, you see
Yeah.
a problem, and the problem, everybody wants to shove it down to the steel mill that I worked with. Everybody wants to shove it down to the bottom. It's not the top's fault, and you know darn well that it's the top fault. So, working with a small business owner, I got to work with the owner, and whether he or she liked it, we affected change. Your target market, uh, what size are you looking at when you work at with clients?
Yeah, I'm really looking into the 0 sometimes, but 1 to 50 employee range. I really do think that the headcount is a better judge of what clients fit me better. But my favorite space to work is the 1 to 10, 1 to 20 employee mark. The challenge, of course, is balancing the fact that I love working with them and the fact that they often don't have the budget to be working with anyone.
Right? Yeah. Do you ever get them financing? Because that's where I started to excel, getting them money.
I haven't. I have heard that said a couple times before, but certainly those sorts of elements of the role have not been my prior experience, so that wasn't something that I've easily turned to.
And you and I preliminary talked for a few minutes, and I said it's the entrepreneur is so determined to be successful that they often get in their own way, and
Yes.
just even finding time to sleep is a big issue. How do you change them so that you can sleep, you can take a
Mm.
vacation?
Yeah, so everything that I do, I'm a little bit different than a lot of other operators or maybe even operator turned coaches. Is I come at it without a solution set. And so I think there's a lot of people that walk into an organization and like, here's your solution, let me just unroll it and, roll it out and we're all good. And I think that really undercuts the visionary that created whatever in the first place or the unique set of circumstances that are at an organization. One of the things I like to say is nobody is nearly as special as they think they are, and every situation is unique. Both of those things are true at the same time. And so I'm a very diagnostic based coach, and that doesn't mean I'm not solution oriented. We definitely need to get to productive solutions, but I need to ask the right questions. And I say all this to answer your question because I think ultimately they don't actually know what problems they actually need to solve. So they're fighting all of these fires that are just symptoms, and they're fighting, and it takes so much energy to fight those fires, and they never actually get down to the root cause that is the glowing ember that is creating the work. And so it's a systems down, it's a root cause systems approach that then allows them to feel trust and confidence. I think that's another thing we undervalue is here's a solution, but if nobody trusts it, or if the CEO doesn't trust it and doesn't feel like they're getting the information they need, they're just going to micromanage it. And we're back at the same exact place we were. So it's really about identifying where those root causes are. And some of those are personality traits you really need to understand about the CEO. And some of them are what are the ways that work actually moves through this organization. And let's understand that and then let's solve for it.
Now, let me ask you a question, because understanding that at the end it always comes down to people, and maybe their habits, their bad habits, the psychological crutches, whatever. But still, can you give us an idea of how much can be solved with automation? How much can be solved by hiring the right people and putting them in the right seats? How much can be solved by maybe a different psychological mindset, different habits, different behaviors? Because to me, those are all solutions, but and they may have to work together. So just give us an idea of how much of all of that, any of that is involved.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very complicated answer because I would say it's different at every organization, right? But what I will say is that most CEOs, most small business founders, right? Founder CEOs, especially, or who I work with, they think that they are solving some sort of specific problem. And oftentimes, what they are actually solving for is an emotional reaction. There is so much fear involved with being an entrepreneur. And these are high level risk takers very often, right? These are people who think they are very comfortable in fear. And so they actually stuff down the knowledge that they are experiencing a fear event. And what it comes out as is micromanagement. What it comes out as is solving challenges with half solutions, right? It means keeping toxic employees when they are poisoning the well, right? Because they think that that toxic employee is saving their company or is keeping them, successful. And so I would say 100, nearly 100% of the time, there is an emotion that I have to deal with somewhere in the mix. But then you layer on top of that, that whatever emotions were involved in the creation of the systems they have tend to reflect the strength of those systems. So when we can get back to a stable, neutral, rational place, we're going to build good systems. If we are moving fast, if we are afraid we are going to fall behind, if we are afraid we are going to go out of business, if we are afraid of all of these things, we're going to build half solutions because they are solving that fear need rather than the business need that is actually underlying it. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but that's how I would approach the answer to it.
Yeah, no. So a lot of fear and a lot of change management, which change management is maybe difficult because of the fear.
Well, and it's interesting because change management, I feel like comes from a very corporate sounding, that sounds very corporate-y, right? And so any small business is going to go change management. I don't need change management. We just roll out stuff. It's like, no, change management is actually more of a psychological process of getting people to adopt a new thing. It's really not, and that's so true of so much that I bring, right? HR is a great example of so many small business owners I work with. They think, I don't want HR here. I had a bad experience. HR sucks, whatever it might be, is I don't want that here. And it's like HR is simply getting anybody that you bring into your organization to engage and do a good job for you and have them feel good about that at the end of the day. That's HR. That should be what HR is. Now, is there compliance? Sure, there's compliance, but there is so much more to HR than these bad experiences people have. And so I think there's layers of that of we have to break down what those corporate ideas that we are against actually are and take away the good from the bad. It's sort of the throwing the baby out with the bathwater is they've thrown out the whole concept of it and we have to realize that some of it is good. And I did realize there was an element of your question that was really important of what can be solved with automation and AI. And I think that is an incredibly powerful question right now. And it's one of the biggest change management problems that we have, right? Because people are sort of off adopting it either individually, or you have certain organizations who are just afraid of it and don't want to think that they can use it at all. And so there's sort of all this stuff across the board that is really creating problems. And I could geek out for probably 4 hours that your audience wouldn't want to listen to about AI and where it belongs and where it's going to stall you and what it can do for you and the implications down the road that you need to be considering now. But it is important that no business should be avoiding AI or automation. However, that doesn't mean just cowboying through an adoption strategy just because you should.
I, I happen to be experimenting with AI, and to me, I'm a Star Trek fan. This dates me, but when they ask the computer a question, and and that's me, I'm going back and forth, and I'm using that information. I'm now writing and using my experience as a business consultant to write some books, additional books. My question, so AI, I'm kind of thrilled with. I'm at the command. But my question also is, are you working predominantly with male business owners, women business
Mm.
owners, or family business owners, or a mixture?
So it has been a mixture. I would love to be working with more female entrepreneurs. For whatever reason, I have had much more experience. And obviously, there's obvious reasons why I've had much more experience with male business owners. There's just more of them. But even still, I would love to be working with more of the female entrepreneurial set. I will say, for whatever reason, I have worked with several family businesses as well. So, really understanding the family dynamics, that is where the emotional work I do and the diagnostic work I do really come into play. Because when you deal with a family situation, you are just layering multiple emotional sets on top of each other without even admitting that the layers exist, and it can be quite often a mess, but it's really beautiful when it can work out if that's what the family is really wanting to do.
Now,
Yeah,
Toby, let
it's
me ask you a question because so you're a small business in your own right. Sort of a two-part question. One is, how do you find your customers or your clients, right? We just talked about, whether they were male, female, but how do you even find them? And then two, for people that are listening that are maybe already also some type of consultant, some type of coach, or even just any type of financial advisor, lawyer, CPA professional offering services to small businesses, what can they sort of copy as a best practice for you for them to also find clients?
Mhm.
mm,
I wish I had best practices for other people. I will be transparent is that my first year out of the gate, even in the different business model that I was approaching, was really quite successful. And it wasn't even that I had a strong network. I think a lot of people find that their first year or two in business is really strong and then it falls off. And oftentimes that's because they had a really strong direct network connection to people who could benefit from whatever it is they're providing, and then those sort of dry up and they needed to have figured out a sales approach and a sales strategy that really worked, and they didn't know they needed one until it starts slumping off. Mine was a little bit different. I had what I call non-repeatable events happen. And this isn't trying to depreciate the work and effort that I put in, but they really were sort of one-off events that I was right time, right place for several of these engagements to work out. And so that was wonderful. But then the slump is real. And I think one of the things I would just say is, you've got to be prepared for that. And as the main earner for my family, it's a real challenge. I don't think we talk about enough pressure and the pain. And so all that fear stuff that I'm talking about, I deal with it every day. That's why it's not that I'm just immune to this stuff, because I can see it and I know it. And in fact, I think I'm a better coach because I do have experiences in that, and I do continue to understand what it's like to, not be producing at the level that you want to. Having said that, I think what I have found to be true is, so much of the common advice right now is about referrals, and I understand why. I still think that there are many businesses out there that are truly great referral based businesses. And what I mean by that is they can be referred, and they can get most of their clients that way, and they can get sufficient income that way. They can maybe even get predictable income that way. But I think those businesses tend to be very well defined businesses. And I'm not just talking if they've done their homework on, you know, what their ICP is or what their offer is. I mean, in the public lexicon, people understand what that business is. Fractional CFOs are a great example of this. Tax professionals are a great example of this. Even business brokers are a great example of this. We know in the public lexicon, when I say those words, we might get it wrong, but we know in theory what those people do. So I already know when you've said those two words, I already know whether I want that business or not. And so that's what really helps in referrals. It's not just can they say a phrase. And so I've really run across a challenge that referrals aren't a great source of business for my job. What I have found is that I need to get in front of my ICP, and that can be a real challenge. And that is what I am sort of working to unlock this year. And if I unlock that, I'm happy to come back and share the magic sauce of how to get in front of these very busy people. But um, when I talk to someone, they resonate with it, right? A lot of my clients have found me, right? I didn't look for them. I didn't do something that landed them. They wrote me a message out of the blue. They contacted me. They ran across my stuff somewhere. And so that's what I find really interesting is trust based, incredibly um, somewhat ambiguous, but also trust-based businesses. Executive coach would be a perfect example of this. Therapist would be another example of this, right? Of I don't want somebody to tell me what therapist I'm supposed to use. I know what I need, and I'm going to go find that for myself. And so the best thing I can tell people is to just make sure you are as visible as possible. I know one of the things I would like to do this year would be to release a book, and the credential that's, or not credential, but the um, you know, implied clout that seems to come with that still of having published material is good. And so just really understanding what kind of business you are and whether referrals are good for you. And if referrals are good for you, then you need to do everything in your um, ability to be in the right places, to meet the right people, to network, things like that. And if that's not going to work for you, save. Networking is never a bad thing to do, but it is a bad thing to do if it is taking up all of the time that you should be using to do other activities. So really make sure that you time scale your networking to the value that it actually provides to you.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That is the challenge because I've seen people that go crazy with networking either in person or virtual. Now virtual, it's so easy. You just pop open the laptop. But then they'll tell you that, yeah, like you said, they went overboard. They're spending 4, 5, 6 hours doing networking in person or on the computer, and they may not get enough referrals and enough business to justify that. That is a problem. Actually, let me ask you maybe a slightly tangential question. So you're in Chicago, which of course is a major city. So I'm assuming that gives you access, like you were just saying a second ago, to get in front of a lot of potential clients that maybe fit your profile very well. But at the same time, we're meeting here on video chat. It's the reach of video chat is incredible. What is the split of your business between in person
Mm.
and video chat? Which one do you prefer? And for what you do, how much of a shortcoming is it to have to do it over video chat as opposed to in person, where you get some things but you don't get others, like in terms of body language and the environment and things like that?
Yeah. So I would say I've had Chicago clients and I've still done all of my work virtually with them. So one of the things that's interesting about a large city is the cost of travel time. And I think in the pre-COVID world, we really devalued that cost of what it was costing us to get from here to there to go in person. And because we were highly valuing that in-person connection and contact. And once COVID hit, we stopped valuing that quite as high. I think we still all realize that there is great value in meeting in person for certain specific activities. And so, what I would say is the work that I do, because I'm very expressive and I have worked with a lot of people who are quite expressive. As long as we our cameras on and it's not just blocked to our face, right? As long as you get sort of the shoulders and the hands that come in to talk with you, right? The real Italian, way of speaking, I guess, here in Chicago. But if you get that expressiveness, I can read all the things I need to see through the video channel. So I'm still able to get a really good read on how they're sort of processing a question that I ask them, or if their face suggests that maybe that's not the reality. So for sure, I have to do all of my coaching with video on. It really wouldn't be effective over phone or non-video video conferencing. And so as long as I can get that visual of this section of a human, then we're all good. Um, and so I prefer that because that allows them to not have the time disruption of leaving an office or doing something. And so it allows for quicker transitions. And I think with the incredible busy schedules that these people have, even though that's a problem I am trying to actively solve for them, they're going to need that ease of access greater than they need the in person. And then, interestingly, for things like networking, Chicago is a really interesting place for networking. It's like we don't want to talk to each other in any sort of business capacity. There's a lot of nationwide networking groups that have either a really weak or a non existent Chicago chapter. And it's just fascinating to me that that's the case. And so it's something I've been working on. I've been, hosting my own networking opportunities. And even still, we are a very beer based culture, I guess. So, Chicago, Milwaukee, some of these hardy Midwest towns. And so it's sort of this bar culture a little bit where happy hours are the predominant way to network. And I will say it's really important for people to recognize that happy hours are really tough for working parents, because happy hour is right in the middle of when dinner time happens, bedtime happens, reading of books, right? This is the most special time that you have with your kid each and every day. And I am tremendously protective of that time. And so I've created, daytime networking because there really isn't sufficient amounts of that. And what I have found is in Chicago, it's not nearly enough.
Have you can you still hear me? Have you tried the
Yes.
National Association of Women Business Owners?
Um, I can't remember if I've looked through so many, but I always find new ones that I'm like, oh, this is a great one to add to the mix. So I will check and see.
Well, the reason I was very active in Pittsburgh in that, and that led me to a tremendous amount of opportunity. And then I was at the national level in Washington, D.C. in that. It was amazing. And I became president of our Greater Pittsburgh chapter, and it was very helpful. When you were talking about time, I always, when I teach classes, I say the reality is you have 80% production time, but another 20% is marketing. I never let that go, so that I didn't have too many drag time, because as long as I stepped to that formula, I was okay. If as soon as I walked away from that formula, I ran into trouble.
Yeah, I think it's the Pareto principle that is saying that, 20% of your work is 80% of the value. And what I find interesting about some of those statistical things is, so let's take tomorrow that I figure out what the 20% of my work that is 80% of my value and decide that that's all I'm going to do from now on. And a lot of the business advice out there sort of suggests that. Well, then tomorrow, if statistics hold true, wouldn't still 20% of my work real equal 80%, right? Like there's something a little bit broken about a recursive set of statistics like that. And so I caution people to overplay some of those things, but it really is important for you to recognize the ROI you have on your activities and then allow time accordingly. And that doesn't mean shut off activities that are low ROI. It just means really make sure you're protecting the time you need for the higher activities.
No, and you know what? You hit on a really important point that Joanne and I talk about all the time, because when you're going to be an entrepreneur, it's not just you being an entrepreneur, but it has to be aligned with your lifestyle. It has to be aligned with your family. It has to be aligned with your friends, everybody in your ecosystem, because right, wrong, or indifferent, for a lot of entrepreneurs, even for a lot of professionals, lawyers, CPAs, um, realtors, a lot of time the expectation is that maybe you work in the office Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, but then you're going to do some type of networking after 5, from 6 to 9, whether it's hanging out at the happy hour, an actual networking event at a hotel, or a virtual thing, or sometimes it's playing golf with the clients on the weekend or whatever. um so I've seen it many times, and I know Joanne has too, where that starts to create the, the need for doing that 20%, which may be 100% outside of working hours, starts to create problems and frictions. And I don't know, I mean, have you
Yeah.
seen this with your clients? And then how do you address it?
So unfortunately, a lot of my clients, they they are so heads down in their business that a lot of times they are neglecting even some of those activities that I'll get to that sometime, right? They are so busy in the day to day of either providing a service or improving their product, whatever that might be, that they really. I work with very few who have golf engagements or even attend all that much networking outside, which again is the how do you get in front of people that don't go anywhere because they're buried under their business, right? That's the key that I am trying to unlock right now, or the door I am trying to find the key to. That's the better analogy, I guess. But I think nonetheless, one of the things that you mentioned is if you keep that kind of schedule, it's really problematic for families, right? Especially families and anybody who and I expand the meaning of families of not just my definition of, I have 3 kids, 2 small children, right? I'm really meaning anybody who has engagements that they need to stay connected to their friends and family. They have deep um agreements with the people around them that they should be spending quality time. And if their business is constantly in tension with the reality of what people around them expect, that's where this burnout really starts happening. So you have some of these entrepreneurs that don't have those restrictions. And they're just saying, sink your life into it, make all the sacrifices. It's worth it. You'll get to the other side. And then there's really a lot of new people who are going, look, I'm not your stereotypical entrepreneur. This might not look like the right time in my life to be doing this work. This might not look like the right time. I don't fit the bill. And yet, these are people who have stunning ideas, amazing, world changing possible ideas, or a really great version of something that exists out there. And so, it's really important that we recognize that entrepreneurs do, in fact, come in all shapes and sizes, and that while you can sink your entire life and sacrifice everything to the company that you are trying to build, that is no means a requirement. You just have to understand what that's going to mean on the other side when you create boundaries so that your life and your work can exist.
One of the things that I often do, I was trained as a counselor, so that brought me in with entirely different skills. One of the things that we set up was agreed upon time. One couple every 3 months went away every 4 days, and the rule was no talk, no business. They also incorporated the family into different vacations, mini vacations, so that those break times. I was a single parent. I, at one time, was partner, crazily or not, in 5 small businesses. My son, see, I didn't have it. Rob would go with me wherever I was going. He learned a lot. And so I always looked at, okay, what'd you learn today? And then he'd find people to relate to. He had a great time. So it's interesting. Each person has their own solution to their own problems. Uh, as we start to wind up, and you're working with clients, what is the one thing that you want to tell them about yourself?
Mm.
Basically, what they need to know about you.
So, one of the things I harp on the most, and so that probably is the right answer to this question because I come back to it so often, is my passion around creating safe, productive, safe, judgment-free, productive spaces for leaders to work through their business. And I think it's something that they don't have enough of. And I think that it's really important that we understand the definition of what that really means. So all three of those categories are super important. So safe is mutually safe. And a lot of times, these founder CEOs are finding people to talk to where it's not actually safe for either themselves or the other person they're talking to. The classic example of this is the CEO who vents to their executive assistant. And it's not that that can never happen or should never happen or anything like that, but it is creating a potentially unsafe situation for one of those two people. Either the executive assistant, if they're not amazing, and most of them are, it could gossip that information to somebody else. And that therefore creates an unsafe situation for the CEO that they weren't necessarily aware of at the beginning. And sometimes it's not so much gossip, it's just an um, unrealized sort of release of information that comes out in a conversation. So it's not something underhanded all the time. It's sometimes just like something slips out that they didn't realize or remember that they learned in a sort of confidential way. Or it's not safe for the EA because they're thinking, oh my gosh, if you're talking about this like this to me, what are you saying to other people about me? And so now you've created a situation where one or the other people in that conversation doesn't feel psychologically safe. And then judgment free is really important. And again, it's dualistic. So when I talk to people, when I have coaching conversations, not only am I not judging the person talking to me, so oftentimes they are going to show me their anger, they're going to show me their frustration, they're going to show me some sort of, not beautiful, not what they would want to show to the world thing. And I'm not going to judge them for that because they are a whole human and they need to experience the whole human spectrum of emotion. And in fact, when we don't, that's actually when things get way more dangerous. And so you're welcome to vent that anger. If it's at me, we're going to probably have a little bit more of an issue. But if you just need to, express in a very angry way a situation that happened, go for it. You need to get that out so that then we can get to what's going to come up, which is productive. And the judgment free also exists for me to the other people that that person is talking about. And so the example of that is if a CEO is talking to me about how awful their CFO is, and this person doesn't get it and they do terrible work, I need to very much understand that I am getting a one person perspective of the situation. And so I can't fully judge that other person based on this um information that I'm getting. So I'm not judging. I'm not going to tell that person, you should definitely fire them, because I don't know the whole story. And I need to recognize where I don't know the whole story. And the productive is that sometimes you can get those first two things from the people around you, your spouse, your friends, your mentors, things like that. But sometimes they never get too productive, because if you think of a spouse or a friend, they're there to back you up. Their job is to make you feel better and to have you included in the social bond. And so they may not give you the tough news. They may not give you the harsh feedback that you actually need to hear in that moment. And they may not even know how to. They may not be a business person. They may not be an entrepreneur. They may not know really how to navigate that situation. And so it's really important for people to find spaces where all three of those things are true. And that's something that allows them to feel less lonely in the job that they have. And I think we have an epidemic of loneliness in leadership positions, because people do recognize I shouldn't be talking, in my whole human way to just anybody. And it means I can't really talk to anybody. And so, yes, there are absolutely people you can talk to that would de-lonely the experience. And that way you get to process the emotional aspect of it, but you also get to the rational, okay, let's actually move forward on this. Let's not just continue to have a cycle where we keep coming back to the same exact conversation. What can we do in a productive and hopefully rational way that moves us forward so that we get out of this cycle that you seem to be in?
So, Toby, we're wrapping up here. You've been more than generous with your time and advice. So, maybe from my side, the last question, because that I'll have for you is, you need to, as a coach, as a consultant, as an advisor, walk a very fine line. I think you were kind of alluding to this. On the one hand, you need to be very truthful, very blunt with people in terms of things that they may not want to hear, or just blindsided to, and you may have to bring up a lot of uncomfortable topics, and maybe even talk to other people to get information to then put things on the table. Yet, let's be honest, at the same time, you have a client, you can get fired, that's your business, that's your revenue. How do you walk that fine line? And would you have one or two pieces of advice for other persons, other professionals that also need to walk that fine line with their clients?
Yeah. This is where I feel a little bit lucky. It seems that particular skill seems to be in my zone of genius. So sometimes I don't even recognize where I'm doing something well, because it's just innate and inherent to the way I operate as a human being. And it can mean that I've actually had to work really hard to write clear and concise emails, because the skill that can make me really good at delivering hard advice that people are open to hearing and they don't get defensive and whatever, leads me to write, wandering emails, or something like that. So again, there's strengths and weaknesses that come with each of these skills. But I do have a way of giving you the information for why I'm going to give you the feedback I'm going to give you. I land the feedback without being hostile, without being, sometimes I'll frame it as a question if I feel like that's going to best land. But at the end of the day, these are mental processes that I don't really need to think through, and I'm not sort of sitting there strategizing, how am I going to deliver this tough news? That is a zone of genius for me that I benefit greatly from, to be able to do this work. Now, if you are working on it, I think there are things, Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor, understanding that radical candor is not blunt honesty. And I think that's something that gets confused. And I think, in fact, she's released an update to her book to really be clear about that, because I think she's been maybe frustrated by how people have interpreted her work. But again, really understanding how to deliver some of these things so that you are being honest, but you are being very empathetic at the same time of that honesty. And again, not going to the other side, which is that I'm being so nice that I forget to be kind, right? Because I think one of the things I used to be, and probably still am to a degree, fairly conflict averse. because of my upbringing, because of my childhood, all of this stuff. And I have had to learn how to accept the fact that if I avoid conflict, I'm actually just creating a bigger conflict later. So I can't be conflict avoidant in the same way that I used to be, and understanding that that clarity is kindness. And I would much rather be kind than nice.
Thank you. Joanne, you're muted. Any last words?
No, I would love to. I'm writing a book on what people should do before they start a business. I would love to interview you, Tobey. So
Wonderful.
I'm going to be reaching out. No, I appreciate your candor. I know the group that you work with. They create our future. That's, if you think about it, you may have a new Microsoft, a new Apple, a new Mary Kay Ash, something, and those are exciting to work with. So please, go on and enjoy it. It's certainly worth the ride. And Sal, thank you for finding Tobey and arranging this interview. And any last words from you, your Duke?
Well, the only thing I will say for anybody that's been listening and wants to get a hold of Tobey or Joanne or myself, our contact information is going to be in the video description. So just look for it there. And then beyond that, Tobey, thank you very much for spending this time with us. You've been so incredibly valuable. You've been so incredibly candid and patient with us. So I really appreciate it, and thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. This was wonderful.